If you want to help Myth Vision Podcast grow, you can join our Patreon. There are different tiers, as well as help out with PayPal. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Dr. Price, I have a personal question for you. What's all this talk about blood crying out from the earth? Is this concept found in any other ancient Near Eastern literature or even in the Greek Athenian world? What does it mean the blood of Abel cries out? Why is life in the blood? Why does blood sacrifice matter? And the idea of innocent blood is portrayed in Matthew 23 as a reason the temple's destruction is coming on Jerusalem. What the hell is going on?
Well, Leviticus, I think, says the blood is the life. And it's kind of like what Tyler said about, what do you call it? Primitive religion. That the earliest people weren't stupid. They just, there was a limited number of things they could know, and they sort of were asking themselves, what keeps you alive? What's different between being dead and alive, or being asleep and awake? And from their languages, it's I don't know if we even have records from these people, but he said in a lot of cultures they speak of the breath and the soul as being the same thing. Even in the Bible, nephesh, the animating breath. He breathed into the man the breath of life. And that's no doubt why. You can just say the same thing with the sacrifices, I think, if you said the living creature is offered to God, but the way to concretize that is to say the blood is offered, because without the blood, you're not going to be alive. If you stop breathing, you're not going to be alive. And they would say that the soul does exit the body in sleep, because that's how they explain dreams. You dreamed you were somewhere else. Well, your soul was. It's not bound by the body unless it never comes back, and that means you're dead. Mm-hmm. I think the blood thing is the same sort of a living metaphor. The blood crying out from the ground is a sort of an old superstition that is found elsewhere in the ancient world. And I just read something about this recently and can't remember the whole darn thing, but it was sort of like a ghost, I guess, that once it's shed into the ground, the living presence is somehow still there. Being dead, he yet speaks, and so forth. It's conceivable that it had something to do with Sheol, that you were down under the ground but could speak. That I'm not sure if that's attested as an ancient belief or not. But it's not uncommon in the ancient world, and it's the agent and the means of life, and without it, you're out of here.
And then I guess the last part of that question comes down to Matthew 23. And the author of Matthew in this particular place is blaming the Jews. And there's this constant language of your father was a liar from the beginning. Like it doesn't, to me, and this is just my personal speculation here, is that this has no ancestral significance in the literal sense. It's almost like if you're a child of darkness, your father's darkness. You can't be from the seed of darkness, literally. I mean, and technically you could call it that, but that would just make you kind of like an adopted son of evil, if you will. And light is the same way, because here he says that your fathers killed the prophets, and from righteous Abel down to Zechariah. Well, what is going on with this blood? Is this not the fathers and the sins being passed down? Well, what is this? Because he's making the point, in a sense here, it seems in Matthew, the reason why they're going to be destroying, the temple's getting destroyed, is because of all this innocent blood from the prophets. You guys are guilty of it. And then I know in other Gospels, Jesus is the reason the temple comes down, and then there's other places where it's James the Just might be the reason the temple gets destroyed, in Josephus and different places. But in Matthew 23, when he talks about the righteous blood from righteous Abel to Zechariah, they're getting blamed for this. Do you have any insight on that, what that means or what's going on in your opinion?
I think that that it isn't just the next generational pay. Thanks, Dad, Granddad, but that it implies you can have the same kind of mischief from all generations. Like it says that you claim to be so pious about putting flowers on the graves of the prophets. It was your ancestors that put them in these tombs, and you're going to do the same thing. You're hypocrites. Well, so it's assumed they're going to follow in their ancestors' wicked footsteps. About your father, the devil, though that's a grammatical tough nut to crack, because as Bultmann says, the grammar with the genitives and stuff has to be read as the father of the devil, not your father the devil. And there is such a character in various Middle Eastern mythologies. And I have to think of the John Carpenter film Prince of Darkness, which does something interesting with that idea. The father of Satan, they call it. Well, let's see. But if it does mean your father is the devil, that would feed into the old Jewish belief that the Cainites may have been the literal offspring of Satan, that Satan tempted Eve to have sex with him, and as a result she bore Cain, and he was a murderer. And in fact that comparison is made in John and in 1 John, and that the heretics in 1 John, or the Jews, are the same thing. They're murderers because they're going to kill Jesus, and it does seem to, it's hard not to see that as anti-Semitic. The only thing that might mitigate that is that the author had such a great interest in Jewish things that you'd have to peg him as a Jew, though that's not clear to me. He's so vituperative to even the Jews who believe in Jesus. They're the ones he really hands it to. So that idea that they killed Jesus and the prophets, and no wonder, because look at their roots, that seems to me to tie in with the idea of Satan as the father of this evil race, as if you're talking about the orcs in Lord of the Rings. And of course it's a loathsome idea, though I think that there's something interesting in that Matthew passage, his blood be upon us and on our children. You remember in the Gospel of John when the Sanhedrin is convened to talk about what to do about Jesus, and they say, surely it makes more sense that one man should die for the people than that the whole people get killed. And John says, as high priest, despite himself implicitly, he's prophesying, because that is exactly what would happen, though not in the sense he thought. It's like an ancient oracle, a double meaning. I have to think that's what's going on in Matthew, that they're saying, oh yeah, sure, blame us, we don't mind, we're happy to do it. And so they're incriminating themselves, but the wording sounds so much like when Moses sprinkles the blood of the covenant on the Israelites and the Torah. That this is the making of the new covenant, and that this may be opening the door for Jews such as the author of Matthew, who was certainly a Jew, to say, this is where we take our stand. We have accepted the covenant. You haven't, unfortunately. So there's kind of a silver lining to that cloud, but basically we don't know if it's even in the negative form that it's a condemnation of all Jews, because the one thing we can be sure of is that it's a stopgap to try to explain how an event happening some 40 years later can be the fault of a generation all dead by that time. On us and our children. So that's all I am sure it means, and the rest, there's no way to be sure.
And in Matthew, I'll end on this, is the replacement theology stuff. So when you talk about anti-Semitism, I could see that being possible, but I also could see a Hellenistic Jew who's sick of what he sees and what he's got going on here, saying, "Hey, we need something new here." But I can't imagine how Hellenized you have to be to want to say there's another nation is going to replace the nation that currently stands. Because some of the scholars I've listened to who are picking apart Matthew, and one of the criticisms when he did a replacement theology lecture was the guy was like, well, that's just one example. It could be understood like this. And he goes, yeah, but the problem is I could show you 8, 9, 10 examples in Matthew alone. And when you have sequential stuff that is clearly indicating taking away from this nation, giving it to a whole nother one, you got to kind of start scratching your head and saying, what is Matthew up to? So is this multiple authors with different intents? And the most earliest form of Matthew was probably a good Jew who's really trying to do the right thing in some sense, and it gets later redacted and gets modified with later Christian ideas by saying, look, the Jews don't have it anymore. Look, where's the nation of Israel? Where's their temple? Well, it's obvious. We Romans, or the Roman Empire, has control now. We are it. And so the new nation is this holy nation, a whole different nation. Kind of the First Peter context, which is a whole different, people want to say that nation is still the strict descendants of Abraham. But is this not a whole different nation? Could this be something new? That incorporates Jews too. Not like no Jews allowed, but it's like something that's not earthly in the physical sense. Like the kingdom was supposed to be an earthly kingdom. This is now a heavenly kingdom, so to speak, kind of thing. It's recontextualized the meaning, it's spiritualized the meaning in a sense. Who knows? I don't think we'll ever really know how far that goes, but I'm interested in that kind of stuff because the natural reading of it that some of the proponents that I'm talking to right now, they'll just take the literal Old Testament meaning and they'll put it, impose it onto the New Testament and say, that's the most natural, uniform meaning that goes from the Old to the New. When you connect the continuity, you can see that these are real forefathers, this is all biological, all these things. And I go, what was the Promised Land? Just an example. Well, it's a physical piece of land in the Old Testament. What about the New? Where's the Promised Land there? Oh, it's a whole different game. It's a different place. It's beyond this world. Oh, why? So many questions I have, Dr. Price.
Well, I get the impression in Mark that with the parable of the vineyard and the workers in the vineyard, that the vineyard, Israel, will be taken from the current leadership, the keepers of the vineyard, which would be the Sanhedrin and the elders and all of that, and given to others who will take better care of the temple and the Jewish people. But in Matthew, I believe he does use the word a nation, that Jews have had their chance and now it'll be given to others, which would be perhaps a Jewish acknowledgement of the Gentile mission. And then in Luke also has it, but I'm thinking of a different Lucan passage where as to who's got the nation, who's got the land. In his version of the apocalyptic discourse, he says that Jews will be exiled at sword point until the times of the Gentiles are over. So that this sounds more like Romans 9 through 11, that for a time they're out of the picture, but not forever. Because you're already dealing with what the same discourse says about the Son of Man gathering his elect from the four corners of the world. And that, I think, has to mean diaspora Jews. It's not the rapture or anything. I mean, you can't prove it, but that makes more sense to me in terms of well-attested Jewish apocalyptic expectation. And though I think the rapture is mentioned in the Testament of Moses, a non-canonical book. I talk about this stuff in my book, the paperback Apocalypse, where I try to explain how all these major items of Jewish apocalyptic lore came about, including the rapture, where'd they get that, and the Antichrist, who, and well, yeah, there is data, there's evidence to show how that may have come about, and so you can do that with some of these as well. But I think you hit the nail on the head with multiple authors of Matthew, because I think it is totally clear that on the one hand there are layers of it, and you can see that using Peter as the focal point. Arlo J. Now, N-A-U, if you want to look it up, which would be a good idea. He shows in several places, it looks as if in Mark, Peter and the disciples are really put down, but in the same stories and so forth, in Matthew, they're rehabilitated. But then in Matthew, they're shot down again. Like, what is this? And he says, well, there's a perfect pattern, if you only look to see it, where Mark didn't like that leadership, but a Matthean redactor who was of the 12 faction decided to change this, but he wasn't at liberty just to cut out stuff from Mark, or people would have complained. So he sort of undid it. I'm giving you the keys to the kingdom, and then later on we find, oh no, he gave the keys to all of the disciples, not just Peter. And thou art Peter, and upon this rock I'll build my church. Get behind me, Satan. And what is this? And so now I think has to be correct. But I went a bit farther than that in an essay called Antioch's Aftershocks, where I looked at Matthew and Galatians and said, well, it seems clear to me that there are three groups represented in Antioch, which produced Matthew, and you've got the James types. Even Gentiles have to keep the Torah, and the Peter group that said, well, no, they don't. They don't have to go the whole route. And the Pauline faction that says, oh, it doesn't make any difference. And that each one of them is like what happened with the Vatican II documents. They put out these things that contradicted one another because they had irreconcilable factions among the delegates to the Vatican II conference. So they gave everybody their say in the documents, with the result of which is it? And that still creates mischief in the Catholic Church. So I think, for instance, like the weird saying in Matthew 23 where he says, woe to you Pharisees, you cross land and sea to make one miserable convert, and when you get him, you make him twice as much a hell spawn as you are. I think that has to be a Jamesian or Petrine condemnation of the Pauline mission, that he's the missionary, and we don't really have any evidence of a Jewish evangelistic mission. And and there are various other things that seem to me to be easily divisible, like the thing about don't insult your brother. If you say Raka, and so on, you'll be liable to the Sanhedrin. What, you mean you can convene the Jerusalem Sanhedrin? This guy called me a nasty name. That's absurd. Why is it in there? Well, because at Qumran, it wouldn't be absurd. They did stuff like, they'd call their gathering, the Sanhedrin, together to dock your food rations for stuff like that. So this must have come, I'd say, from the James faction, and so on and so on. And it might be that some of these things were added in layers also, or it might be that they just decided to include a bit for everybody and you take your choice.
Matthew 7 makes me think that this might be jabbing at Paul too, worker of lawlessness. This, I don't know, or at least a Pauline group that follows Paul that seems to be, because it's not the same way as I thought when I was a Christian, worker of lawlessness. I used to think that just meant like doing good works, period. I never thought Torah. When we're Christians, we're never really taught the Torah. It's not like you need to know what that is. You're a Christian. But when you think of it in that context, Matthew 7, worker of lawlessness, worker of non-Torah.
Yes,
you know?
anomia in Greek, non-Torahism. He doesn't just mean, yippee! He means, because they're saying, we were Christian apostles. We're healing and doing miracles in your name. What do you mean we're not on the list? I'm sorry. Get out of here, you non-Torah Christians.
Ooh.
It has to mean that.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, the speculative on my part, but it would sound like that's a jab at a Pauline type of Christianity. See?
And who is it that teaches that the Son of Man came to abolish the law and the prophets? Not just some pagan skeptics. Someone is teaching that that was the goal of Jesus' ministry. It's a Christian opinion that Matthew doesn't like. And who taught that? Well, Paul, Marcion really did no difference given the question. And the already in Mark you have the you have a shot taken at this position when John says, Master, you'll be glad to know we met a guy working our side of the street casting out demons in your name, and since he wasn't one of us, we told him to cease and desist. And Jesus says, you did what? He says, look, this guy is doing miracles in my name. How can you think he's our enemy? Whoever is not against us is for us. That's got to be Paul. He's successfully using the name of Jesus to exorcise, but he's not one of the 12. What difference does that make? And so that's got to be a shot at this anti-Paulinism.